very grateful that you all could make it, especially during this busy time of the year and coming from far away, like Rebecca, for instance, and others. Of course, behind each great paper, there is a ghostwriter, and the ghostwriter of this speech is Karen. Karen did all the research, and I am just reading it, and it is all true. So the first retirement which we want to celebrate tonight is Maria, my daughter Maria, who is in Canada. I would like to start out by recognize her on her recent retirement. She received her BA from Western Michigan University. Their first career position as an employment counselor was at a grassroots organization called the Working Center in Kitchener, where I taught, and that is how she got the contact to Canada. Following this position, Maria did the most important job of raising 3 wonderful children for 9 years, and my great-grandchild, Wally, has just been born. So the whole family, from Rosie to Wally, is all spiritually
German use that word.
Then in 1992, Maria returned to university to pursue a social work degree and provincial licensing, and she worked for 1 year with St. Thomas University in the capacity of campus minister, and I was there 1 year as a chair there, and so we worked together at that time. Then she worked 3 years as a counselor with the Transition House, which is a residence for battered women. Maria was always had this feeling for women who were treated very badly, already here in Kalamazoo, and she carried that with her to Canada. Followed by 3 years with the Sexually Assault Center as a social worker. Maria has finally 23 years of service where with the Community Mental Health Center providing therapy and support services to folks 65 years and older or 92 and older with mental illness. Over the years, there was some overlap with education and other jobs, and at times Maria was working 2 jobs and going to school at the same time. We were there in Fredericton when Maria did her examen, and it was really hectic, and Maria was very brave in all these activities. Maria remarried in 2013, and became a stepmother of 2 special kids, Matt and Shannon. Maria is most proud of her children and the compassionate, peaceful, loving adults they are, not to mention the 4 grandchildren. Maria can now enjoy more time with her husband. Okay, the husband is important. He is an Anglican priest, and he was her boss for many years before they finally got married. And now comes our next person who has to be recognized, and that is Karen, who wrote this whole paper. Karen, whom I have known for 34 years, she I have to be truthful, she retired at the end of June with 30 plus years of teaching. In the fall semester of 1985, Karen took one of my classes called Psychological Elements in Religion. That is the most stolen course of mine in this state, in this country. It has been stolen from Florida to San Francisco and so on. And there will be a book out of it, which Karen and I will do together, because she is this great pedagogue, and this will be a book for schools, so for normal people. I announced in
Karen's going to help with that part.
She's the normal one.
So I announced in class that I was looking for a student to live in my home and help out with cooking and cleaning. The prehistory of that is when my dear wife Margie died, she hoped that there would be a friendly woman coming along to help. Well, Karen was this friendly woman 34 years ago. She came after Steve went to law school, then Karen took over and has taken over ever since. Karen was very interested and met with my daughter Agnes, and she was hired and started in January 1986 and lived in the basement with a mouse. And then slowly advanced to the rooms up there until she came to the top of the whole organization. Karen lived at the House of Peace and helped out in many different capacities until graduating from Western Michigan University in 1987. Sometimes Karen also lived together here with her sister, and sometimes with Aggie together. So, and altogether, I don't know, we had 20 or so students, and Reika was one of them too. Where is Reika? There is Reika. Reika, you don't have a chair.
Oh, I'm fine.
Okay, well, good.
Thank you.
Karen went on to complete her master's degree in education administration at Michigan State University. She graduated in 1992. She also had Morgan that same year. Karen started her teaching career with Traverse City Public Schools in 1994. She taught there 2 years, then moved downstate after she met Ken. Our great brother Ken is sitting over here. She was hired into Huron Valley School District and taught for 1 year and became an administrator for 2 years. She was recruited by an administrator from Birmingham Public Schools and hired into the district in 2000. She went back into the classroom to teach at both the middle and elementary school. She retired in June of this year. She got credit toward retirement for all the educational positions she held prior to teaching, so she was able to retire with 30.8 years of service. During the 34 years together, and now is an important thing that Karen broadened her education, her pedagogical activity into our enterprise here, and later on also Ken entered this. I could not have taught that long without Karen and Ken, who were helpful in this. So all her administrative genius and educational genius Karen broadened into a worldwide scope here in the House of Peace. During the 34 years together, Karen and I traveled all around the world together. We opened up these in Dubrovnik and in Yalta and so on. And we had many exciting education and memorable adventures along the way. In 1987, we traveled to Frankfurt, Germany, my hometown, and then to Dubrovnik, Croatia, where we have this international course on the future of religion, which is now 43 or 44 years old. She brought along another student, Katie Cagney, who is now in Chicago, and then she probably teaches there somewhere. She got her PhD there. These were very, very dangerous times. We drove through the Alps, and Karen knew how to drive a Volkswagen, also backward and forward, but Katie did not. Very small ways with mountains on the right and the left, and a abyss down on the other side. And Karen took pictures of the whole thing, and I went from one anxiety attack to the next. This was my graduation present to Karen. 1988, Frankfurt, we went to Frankfurt again, and to Dubrovnik. In Frankfurt, we visited my relatives, and of course, saw Frankfurt itself and where I grew up and all this. In 1989, we went to Israel and Greece, and in Israel, we were searched by the Mossad, the Secret Service of the state, and Karen was in a separate room, and I'm in a separate room. And I said, my God, she always says the truth. It will be a catastrophe. Nevertheless, somehow it fit. We were at the same time, same place, and so on. In January 1993, Karen drove me to Fredericton, New Brunswick, in a blizzard, where I was hired to serve as chair at St. Thomas University, where also Nick went, Nicholas, and where also Maria worked. On the way, my car lost its heating system, so we had to stop and get repairs done in the middle of this horrible snowstorm. And so poor Karen froze up there, and I had to warm her up in order to be able to drive on. And we asked for some place, and then we were told it was was some kind of a village, and the village was invisible. It was just all under the snow. It was horrible. So nevertheless, we found a small French-speaking family who owned a repair shop, and they cooked a wonderful soup, and we were somehow made normal there in this horrible storm. Thank goodness the family fed us and took good care of us. After the repair, Karen drove us through a blizzard to Fredericton, a small street with these big trucks coming down and nothing visible at all in the snow. We had dinner with Maria's family. Finally, we got there at 12 o'clock at the night or so and stayed at the bed and breakfast, which was spooky. There was an old lady with her son, and it was just, she was out of the Middle Ages, but we survived the whole thing. So, well, and then Karen flew home the next day in a tiny little plane in the middle of a snowstorm, and she didn't even know where she was flying. She may have gone to Washington before she got to Detroit or whatever. The pilot did not even know exactly where he was going. So this was nevertheless a great experience, and it was really dangerous, the whole thing. In 2007, Karen and I traveled to Oxford, England, where I presented at Oxford University, where, by the way, one of my books was globally known, which was very nice among all these scholars. It is then my lost cousins, wanted to make it a bestseller, and he went to Peter Lang in Switzerland and said, "This is material for a bestseller." And Peter Lang said, "No, we are honest people. We are not in the best-selling business." And so he did not make a bestseller, but another American or English edition. This Peter Lang is also, they never tell you what they do with the money they steal from you. So I am the one who is working, and they get the money and I get the honor. So that is also with Peter Lang. So I said once, "What did you do with all the money which I produced?" And he said he bought an orphanage. So I have an orphanage in England. I said, "Could you not have asked me if I want to have an orphanage or not?" I said, "I like orphanages, but I would have like to have known that I had an orphanage." So that was Peter Lang. He's retired too now. We visited castles and ate wonderful food in the English countryside. We then traveled to London, where we got stranded over the weekend to a strike. A pleasant labor union somehow organized a strike with British Airways, and we made the best of the time and saw 3 famous Broadway shows, Les Miserables and Phantom of the Opera and The Lion King. And the airlines paid for our hotel and the performances, as well as food for the weekend. So labor unions are really great people. That is why when I came here, as soon as I came here, I founded a labor union. By the way, when you look over there, the governor of the state told in a document all my great deeds, and she forgot the labor union, in spite of the fact that she's a Democrat. Then we can see how bad things are. The airlines nevertheless paid for everything. Karen had to struggle, as always, with the manager of the airlines to get us a seat in order to fly back to the United States on Monday. She stood her ground, as always, at the counter until they agreed without any additional $850, which they want to have. So Karen is a wonderful negotiator. Deal maker, much better than the chief now. In 2016, we traveled to Frankfurt again to visit my relatives, my niece Carola and dear sister-in-law Lieselotte drove us to Geyser. That is a strange word. It's a small town. It was in the death zone between the German Democratic Republic and the German Federal Republic, and it was mine. So for 30, 40, 50 years, I couldn't go to Geyser, but I grew up in a castle there. My uncle was a judge there, and now it has been made into a hotel. So if I could still go, which I hope there to in May, I would like to go there, and then I could sleep in the same room in which I slept as a little fellow. As a matter of fact, the room where I slept with my grandfather for whom I always made trouble because I told him that he was old and ugly. And then he ran after me as fast as he could. Still, now I feel what he went with me so late. So, nevertheless, when I was 1.5 years old, I almost died from a lung infection, and it was a Jewish doctor, Ackerman, who recommended that I should be put into ice cold water and into hot water back and forth. And my uncle and my aunt and her maid did that for me. And my uncle thought I would hate women for the rest of my life, which I did not. I was forgiving. But nevertheless, I survived, and Dr. Ackerman was delivered in a concentration camp and was killed. I asked him when we went to Gaza, asked for the people, and nobody could remember him, in spite of the fact that his son had in the meantime moved into his father's position. Okay, so then Chinese Carola and their sister-in-law, Lise Lotte, drove us to Gaza. We traveled further to Dubrovnik and then to Rome. I was the tour guide, and Karen and Ken visited over 50 churches. The truth is that Karen and Ken drove me in a chair through the whole city of Rome, through the whole Vatican with all the good and bad popes. I was going through all these chambers. It was beautiful, but it was hard work, which Ken and Karen had to do. So I have been there in Rome, but it is always a new experience. And last, Dustin and I think we wrote an article about religion, the dialectic of the Roman religion, of utility, and so all our experience went into that article. Has it come out, or will it come out?
Not yet. It's in the last stages.
There's always hope. Okay, then in 2017 we had a wonderful trip to Frankfurt again, and we always went through Frankfurt and then to Dubrovnik and Paris, and the same thing happened. Where Karen and Ken pushed me into in a little chair through Notre Dame, Sacré-Cœur, and all the wonderful famous places, and where the revolution took place. Paris is a city of bourgeois enlightenment. That is why ISIS likes it so much and attacks it. So, because that is the center where our constitution comes from, where all enlightenment, what we have, the little bit we have, all comes from there. We also traveled throughout different states in the United States, as well as to London, Waterloo, and Kitchener, Canada, to visit family and friends, as well as attend conferences and teaching. So I taught many times in Canada. And that is where Maria then got her Canadian connection, so that a third of the family is now in Canada instead of here. We completed the application process for visas in order to travel to Yalta, Crimea in 2017, but due to an executive order by President Obama, we were not able to work in the Crimea. It was not that we could not travel there, but I was forbidden to do anything. That means I founded 20 years ago a course on religion in civil society. It was wonderful, but we asked the university and the lawyer and the general counsel, and we asked the White House even, and we asked also the Treasury Department, what if, first of all, professors were hit by the sanction of Obama, and then we found out that I could not speak before the group, that I could not even Skype before them, that I could not sign, as I usually did, 240 professors whose papers I had to sign so that they would be paid, and so on. Nothing. I could do nothing. I could just sit there. And otherwise, I would be fined millions of dollars, and the university would lose its good reputation. We were always threatened if I would cross the boundary of the Ukraine and to Yalta, then we would be hit and troubled and tortured and whatever. So we did not even plan to go through the Ukraine, but fly through Moscow and directly. So, but it was a lot of trouble, and it's still going on, and we lost over $2,000 in the whole process. And but others, like oil, lost much more, into the billions through these sanctions. And these sanctions were made because of the Crimea was attacked by the Russians and annexed. And nobody in the Crimea knows that they have been attacked or annexed. That means it's an outright lie. It is just a phony type of a thing. And so for this phony type of a thing, not the Russians, but we had to suffer. because we couldn't go there. So Dustin was with me too in the Ukraine, and also the who else was with me there?
I was.
Hmm?
I was.
You were with me,
you
yeah,
went too.
and Stevie
Maybe you went too.
Stevie went
Steve.
with me, and yeah, okay, very good. We completed the application process for visas and so on, and then we could not go. Okay, now after this beautiful two retirees and the recognition, I come to myself, and I said a few things already, and you know that. So let me just go very shortly as far as my early retirement story is concerned. I'm very sorry that I had to retire so early, but it was Dr. Lapenna, who is a real good friend of mine, but sometimes the friends are doing the worst to oneself, so he stopped me. Okay, nevertheless, in 1933, that is when Hitler came into power, I went to the elementary school in Frankfurt, a suburb of Kinheim, and so when I was there, maybe a year or two, President Hindenburg died, and then Hitler took total power. He became president and chancellor and leader all together. And so the whole drama, the German tragedy started at that time. Then in 1938, I went over to the Lessing Gymnasium. My mother, who was a very simple, beautiful person, but she didn't know what a humanistic elite gymnasium was. So they wanted to put me into a trade school where I could become a banker, and I threatened suicide. I put myself on a little railroad near Geyser. The train came only once a day, but nevertheless, I was sitting there waiting for it, and that was so impressive for my environment that they said we have to send him to the humanistic gymnasium. So that is how I did not become a banker. But something else. Okay, 1943.
Global banking.
It's good that Thomas is not here. He would have sang hallelujah. Okay, so then, but 1943, when I was not even through that Lessing Gymnasium, when I was 15, then I joined the Air Force, and I defended Frankfurt and the Rhine-Main area, which stretched to Berlin, to Cologne, and to Kaiserslautern and Mannheim and so on. And in that process, I shot down, unfortunately, 18 bombers, which means 12 people in each bomber. And I hope that that all of them came down, which happened all the time. That the Germans had innumerable American pilots there, so they did come down. I never know exactly who comes down and so on, but I hope that all 18 crews came down safely. And then I came to the army, where I shot 2 tanks down, and they did not come out of it, which shows the horrible tragedy of the thing that in a battle, it was the Battle of Aschaffenburg, which was completely meaningless strategically or any other way. And it was just a mobbing up operation, and Patton sent the tanks into the wrong place at the wrong time. And so it was in Alzenau, it was the city of Alzenau, where also then I lost my whole company, 250 men whom I visited every summer from Frankfurt, and they were still there, their helmets were there, and their wires were camouflage and so on. So this shows, whoever tells you a story that there was something nice about any kind of a war, there is a book here which I just got about the Second World War. There is nothing nice about anything of that. It's only for those who come home and then tell heroic things. Okay, so that was the army then, where I was in an officer's school. I was supposed to go to Russia and kill atheistic Bolsheviks, and so Hitler marched with 4 million men into Russia and killed 26 million Russians, poor farmers, and 6 million Jews. It is good that we remember the 6 million Jews. We should remember them all the time. There's one friend of us who is with us tonight, whose parents will be recognized for having been in Auschwitz and so on. So we certainly must remember our Jewish brothers and sisters but we must not forget the 26 million Russians. So the real war took place in the east, not in the west. So Eisenhower had 60,000 men with whom he fought. In Moscow in the first winter, 10 million men were fighting in Moscow. And the army in Stalingrad, Paulus' army, was over 1 million men. That means the double of the Eisenhower army. So we should not forget what has happened on the other side just because they were communists or whatever. So nevertheless, I was then I had to surrender, and I surrendered to General Patton and to the Canadian Army in the forests around Alzenau, where I had thrown him out just a few days before. He just came back with more power, and but there was something very funny happening while I surrendered and gave my weapons to him. I had a sergeant. He was an Austrian, and he pulled out of his jacket an Austrian flag and said he had never been in the German army. He was in the Austrian army. There had not been an Austrian army for 10 years. So all the Canadians and all the Americans just laughed themselves to death about the whole thing. I would have shot this guy if I still had a revolver there. It was a really aggressive moment for me. I never saw him again afterwards, the Austrian fellow. Okay, so nevertheless, I was then shipped through Germany and through Frankfurt and Cologne and not Cologne, no, Worms. And in Worms for a whole week, I didn't get anything to eat. I found out how long you can live without food there. So it was not the fault of anybody, because, and I never complained to the military government about I complained about other things, but because the problem was enormous. There was the American army, and then there were all these Germans who surrendered, who didn't want to go to the Russians. So they all went to the West, and suddenly the British and the Americans had all these prisoners at hand that nobody could, logistically, could handle that adequately. So nevertheless, then I went to Marseille. On the way, we went to Alsace-Lorraine. Alsace-Lorraine was sometimes German, sometimes French. Now it was French again. So therefore, those Germans who were now French again, they wanted to show that they were good Frenchmen. And so when I was driven in an animal car with other prisoners and with a small window, I looked through the window and we were stoned. So I became unconscious. And the Protestant minister took his last water he still had and woke me up again. And since that time, I am ecumenical. I love the Protestants. So there are many around here, and they are lovely people. So then I went to Marseille, and there was something strange. Sometimes, history is very contingent. Every day people were marched to the coast in order to put 100 people to put little pebbles on each other, so big little heaps of stone. And and one day I thought, well, maybe I could do something too. So I went and was the last man in the 100 group there. And we marched and marched, but we never got to the beach. I thought that was one group made the heap and another group undid the heap, because you have to keep people busy somehow. So, but they didn't go anywhere. The group didn't go anywhere. And until we came to a ship, a Liberty ship. Liberty ships were ships which had no names, only numbers. And they could only cross the ocean 5 times and they would sink automatically. So nevertheless, I was put on that ship, and it was shipped to Africa. And there we thought we would build roads or whatever. But then the ship was put together with 25 other ships, and we went through Gibraltar and went across the Atlantic Ocean. So on the way, there were 2 U-boats suddenly appeared. The periscopes came out of the water, and the sirens, all 25 ships, the sirens, and the captain put lovingly the prisoners along the railing, because he thought that the Germans would not shoot at them if they saw that they were German prisoners. They didn't know what German U-boat commanders were like. So, but they didn't want to fight anymore. They had Nazis with them to go to Argentina, where all the friends were, and so they just were diving again and disappeared. So finally we got to Norfolk, and the first time in 5 years that I saw a city with light. because all our cars which had lights or whatever, everything was dark during the war. So Norfolk suddenly was there with all its lights, and it was a tremendous experience. And so then I was put into a camp, and I was an officer, so I didn't have to work, but I volunteered for work. And so I was put into a cafeteria where I made hamburgers for the GIs and their girlfriends at night when they went to the movie. But then I let every 10 hamburger go into my pocket. We had these big pockets, and it was full of hamburgers, which I took home to the camp, because the camps were fed well during the war. But then the war ended, and there was no German government after Chancellor Dönitz. And so there was no partner anymore, and they were not really bound by the Geneva Convention anymore. But they still, I mean, the food was 100 times better still than all over Europe, but it was much less than they had before. So they felt hungry, and therefore I took those hamburgers home. Until the owner of the thing discovered that the hamburger had disappeared again. And so I was fired. So then they put me into the harbor, where I drove a little truck by which I boxes with clothing or whatever, where I carried them with my little car over to the railroad car. And there was a law that every box which would fall, the content belonged to the prisoners. So I made sure that every 10th box was falling down, and